In this conversation, we will explore what MBSE truly means in practical terms, the business value it delivers, and how technologies like SysML v2 are shaping the future of MBSE. To guide us through these topics, we are joined today by Scott Ragon, Principal Product Manager of Ansys, part of Synopsys. He brings deep expertise in helping organizations to adopt and scale MBSE as part of their digital engineering transformation. Let's kick off the second episode of the Model-Based Conversation series. Hi, Scott. Thank you very much for joining us today. Before we discuss the MBSE drivers, its benefits, or the adoption challenges, how would you explain in simple terms what is model-based systems engineering, MBSE?
Yes, so what you usually hear people say is MBSE is systems engineering with models. It's simply that, doing systems engineering with models. And that's correct. That's a good statement. But it naturally raises the question, what is systems engineering? So let me take just a couple minutes to talk a little bit about what systems engineering is, and that'll help us understand what MBSE is. So systems engineering is when the systems engineer, designs and manages a complex system using systems thinking, using a systems engineering perspective. And what does that mean? What that means is the systems engineer doesn't really focus on the parts that make up a system, but the system engineer instead looks at the system as a whole. And they want to understand how the various parts that make up that system interact with each other to provide the overall system performance, the overall system perspective. So what does the system engineer do? Some of the important roles or functions of the system engineer are, number one, to guide a team of engineers. These are mechanical engineers and electronics engineers and software engineers, safety engineers, a big diverse team, guide those people to design a system that meets the customer requirements. The second half of the statement is, okay, MBSE is systems engineering with models. What does models mean? What does that mean? And I like to contrast MBSE with the traditional way of doing engineering, the old way of doing engineering, which we usually call the document-based approach to system engineering. And it's a document-based approach because the traditional way, and it's a way that would come naturally to you if you sat down to do this, of designing a complex system, is you do all this coordination and communication with your team using documents, by using text documents, spreadsheets, diagrams. These are all documents, and that's what people used to do, and they still do it in a lot of cases. But the downside to designing a system using documents is you might communicate with one set of engineers using this set of documents, and with another set of engineers using another set of documents, and so on and so forth. And what quickly happens is you've got documents everywhere, and the documents start to become inconsistent. They might contradict each other. And it really becomes a nightmare if you want to change something. Because if you change something over here in this document, you need to update all the other documents to be consistent with that change. And in the real world, with all the messiness of the real world, usually that change doesn't happen. And so you end up with documents everywhere that are inconsistent with one another. And if you're an engineer and you're reading this document over here, it may not agree at all with the document that other engineer might be using over there. So it quickly, as the system becomes more complex, as more and more people get involved in the design of the system, the document-based approach starts to break down. Because a key principle of MBSE is that when we exchange information among this diverse group of engineers, we should exchange it in a way that all the engineers have access to the same information. They're not working off of different documents, but they're all working off of a central source of information that they all share. So what that means is the information that I have as engineer A is the same as engineer B has over here. We're working off the same master document set. And if engineer C changes something about the system, that change is visible to the other engineers as well. So we like to say in the MBSE world, authoritative sources of truth. That's that shared information source that all the engineers can use to collaborate with each other, and they all have the most up-to-date current information that is out there that is needed for them to do their jobs. Now, the other important thing, and this is where the term model really becomes important, is this exchange of information is not ad hoc, but the information that is exchanged between the engineers and the systems engineers and everybody else is done in a very precise and rigorous manner, and usually using a standard that everybody can understand. A good example of this is usually system architecture information. These days, if you're doing MBSE, that information is exchanged using a language called SysML. And the advantage of using a language like SysML is that anyone who has learned system engineering as part of their education, they can read and interpret and understand a SysML model. So by using a common standard to exchange information, whether it's about system architecture or something else, that's where the word model comes in. We're exchanging models where everybody who is going to receive the information has the knowledge they need to interpret that information and to do their job. So that's a long way of explaining what systems engineering is and how MBSE is an improvement on the old ways of doing systems engineering.
Apart from breaking the silos and connecting all the engineers working in the same authoritative source of truth, I would like to know what's driving the growing adoption of MBSE across industries. If you notice differences between industries when they decide to go for this methodology.
Yes, so I think in order to answer that question, I need to talk about what are the benefits of MBSE. Because the reason that MBSE is being more widely adopted is because the benefits are real. People are seeing real benefits from adopting MBSE. And the benefits of MBSE at a high level are about reducing the cost of developing these complex systems. And that's because a lot of the cost overruns on a system development process is because errors are made, and those errors are not discovered until late in the design cycle. And late in the design cycle, we've already manufactured things perhaps. It becomes very expensive to fix errors. If you discover an error late, it's very expensive to fix. And one of the nice things about MBSE is it's a structured way of doing system engineering. And one of the major benefits of MBSE is you typically discover most big errors early in the process. And if you discover them early, you can save yourself a lot of money. Now, it's also a lot faster, so you can get the product to market much quicker than you could before for the same reasons. You're not wasting a lot of time at the end with integration problems. You're not discovering problems at the end of the process, and that means you can get a good product to market quickly, more quickly than you could before. So it's really about cost and time benefits. And, underlying all this is risk, of course, too. The risk for the company developing the product is less because they're following a very precise step-by-step process of doing the design, and it reduces the risk on the product development. And, Along those lines, I should mention that in the United States, the U.S. Department of Defense, the Department of War now, has mandated that major weapon systems who have historically had problems with cost overruns and schedule delays, the US DoD is mandating that the weapon system manufacturers and designers utilize digital engineering to design those systems. And that push from the DoD to use digital engineering, and MBSE is an important part of digital engineering, is really driving a lot of companies to take the initiative to adopt MBSE practices, and we're really seeing it pay off. And I don't want to imply that this is only for aerospace and defense companies, but they're the ones who are adopting it more quickly, and they're getting a push from the government to do that. And the results are very encouraging.
For those organizations that are not have not adopted MBSE yet, is there a certain level of maturity or readiness required before adopting this methodology?
I think that is a great question. And I think a lot of companies are reluctant to adopt MBSE because they think that there's all kinds of things they have to learn and do before they can even start doing MBSE. Whereas I think the reality is better than that. With MBSE, you don't have to do everything at once. You don't have to eat the whole elephant, we say. You don't have to eat the whole elephant at once. You can eat it in pieces. You can adopt MBSE gradually. And so what I have seen companies do that have been mandated to implement digital engineering practices and MBSE practices is they adapt it slowly. Because one of the things about MBSE is for a lot of companies, it requires some cultural changes, cultural in the way that they do engineering. And people don't want to do this all at once. They don't want to hire a whole bunch of new people, learn new things overnight, but you don't have to do that. You can adopt MBSE principles on a piecemeal basis, and you can start seeing benefits very quickly if you do that. And I would say if anybody is watching this and is interested in adopting MBSE, that's where Synopsys can really help your company to do that, because we have a team of engineers who have experience working with companies to adopt MBSE practices. And we can work with your team, take a look at what you're doing today, figure out how you can improve that by adopting MBSE practices, and give you some advice on maybe how you can start adopting MBSE practices on a piecemeal basis.
You also partially spoke about that, but what are the biggest misconceptions that organizations have about MBSE? The first time they heard about MBSE, which are the main misconceptions they have?
Yeah, let me talk about a couple of them. One of them we've already touched on. There is the impression in some quarters that you have to do everything at once. You have to adopt MBSE everywhere and adopt all aspects of MBSE in order to benefit from it. I don't think that's true. I think you can adopt MBSE practices in a piecemeal fashion and see real measurable benefits from doing that. That's number one. Number two is a slightly different thing. We often talk to people who have the impression that MBSE is only about building a system architecture model, a SysML model, or something like that. And so the misconception I see is that if my company starts to use SysML to define the architecture of our system, we're doing MBSE. And MBSE is more than just creating system architecture models. All these different engineers we talked about before need to collaborate with each other. Having that central source of information, which that SysML model can provide, is very valuable. But MBSE is a lot more than just building system architecture models. You have to bring in simulation. You have to bring in test. You have to bring in people across your organization that can all collaborate together on the design and creation of a system. And this is probably a good place for me to mention also that MBSE is not something you only do in the early design stages of your system, but it's something that you can continue to do in terms of the way you share information, the way you collaborate, the way you communicate. You can do that throughout the entire design cycle, starting at the early stages of design, but going through manufacturing, going through maintainability, all the way through retirement. MBSE has something to provide, to contribute in all those stages of the design cycle. So that might be a good third one, is that MBSE is not only at the early stages of the design process.
Let's now talk about the future. Although we don't have a crystal ball, we already see some key trends emerging, and I would like to know your perspective on how MBSE will evolve over the next, I don't know, maybe 5 years, and what is the role that technologies will have.
So I think technology is going to be important, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But I also think that as more and more companies succeed in implementing MBSE, we're going to learn some important answers to the best way to implement MBSE in various types of organizations. So as we see company A succeed, company B succeed, A and B are probably different types of companies, but they've each figured out a way to make it work. And they've solved cultural challenges in doing that. And I think figuring out how to overcome some of these cultural issues, over time, more and more companies will do that. And I think we'll all learn from that. So I think it'll become easier for companies to get into MBSE and to benefit from MBSE because they'll learn lessons from their peers. So that's one thing, a non-technological thing. Now, in terms of technology, we're going to continue to see companies like Synopsys improve our tools, improve the ease of use of our tools, but also to adopt new standards. You talked about SysML v2. SysML v1 was originally, I think it was 2006 or 2007 when SysML v1 was originally put out there for people to use. It was originally adopted. And we've learned a lot of lessons about SysML since 2006, 2007. And the end result of that has been a new version of SysML v2, but just things like making it easier to exchange data between a SysML v1 model created by one vendor and a SysML v1 model created by another vendor. That's almost impossible with v1, but v2 is going to make that a lot easier. And there are various reasons for that, and we're excited about that, and that's part of the reason that Synopsys started to adopt a SysML v2 modeler, because that interoperability is something that we think is really important, and a lot of our customers do too. So we're going to see the standards themselves evolve. We're going to see the vendors like Synopsys and the others in the space make their tools easier to use. And I think AI is going to play a huge role in that making it easier to use category.
As a final word, what piece of advice would you give to organizations that are just beginning their MBSE journey?
So first of all, don't wait, get started and talk to some MBSE experts, talk to us, talk to others about the best way for you to get started and to gain benefits quickly. And dive in, make it happen. Don't put it off too long. Dive in, get some experience, and we're here to help you do that. That would be my answer.
Thank you very much, Scott. Well, it looks like that success with MBSE starts with clarity on your current maturity, your goals, and the step that will you get there. And the journey doesn't have to be big to be meaningful, as you said. So thank you very much for your time today, and thank you everyone for watching this episode. Thanks.